All right. So we obviously had streaming issues. Um, I feel like I get OBS working like one out of three times. So this was one of the bad times. And so we're just going to do a recording, and then hopefully we'll do some live streaming more in the future, and maybe we'll bring Ryan back for a live Q&A then. So I'm here with Ryan Murdock. Many of you probably know him now as sort of the clip image generation guy. But I've been following Ryan for, a while now, and have really like always been sort of into his work. And then obviously I'm really happy to see him be really successful with his current project. And we're just going to chat a little bit about sort of where he started and where he is now. And I think he's going to walk us through one of his notebooks and tell us a little bit about it. So thanks, Ryan, for showing up.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this. I think it's a cool thing to do. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm hoping to like do this with more artists and get more people involved because one, it's hard for me to make all my own content, as I'm sure you're aware. And two, I just think like there's so many people out there doing really cool things, and um, many of y'all are far smarter than me. So I'm also hoping to like steal some stuff off of your brains and just sort of like learn a little bit as well and help other people learn. So. If you wouldn't mind telling me, just tell me a little bit about yourself and maybe how you got into machine learning.
Yeah, so for the first like 17 years of my life, I didn't do like any art except in classes that required it. But when I turned like 16 or 17, I was like, okay, this is cool stuff. So I started with this visualizer called like Milk Drop that was a big deal in like the early 2000s. So I was late to the game to use it, but I started with that, and then I realized that I wanted to um, do some more art where I had like more control over what goes on in it. So I started using processing, which is, I'm sure many people know about it. It's that kind of art language basically where you just kind of like Java but for artists. And so I used that for a while. Then I saw this video by the guy who does like the nature of code YouTube videos, and he
Dan Schiffman,
implemented
yeah.
yeah, he
Yeah.
implemented a like one layer single perceptron, which is basically just like a neuron that says yes or no. And I started implementing neural networks in processing, and eventually moved to TensorFlow, and nowadays I use PyTorch. But I guess just all of these great open source tools kind of helped me get started into this pipeline of doing that. And it was actually really good for me because I was kind of going through college just not sure what I wanted to do at all, but not having the grit to totally commit to art as a major or as a career. So I ended up working in this material science lab doing machine learning for like research purposes, and that's led me to become a PhD student in cognition and neuroscience, and I still do some machine learning for my work that I'm doing now, but it's mostly a pastime, mostly a amateur thing for me.
That's awesome. I mean, I can't, I definitely have seen people put in neural networks into processing, but I can't imagine that is a fun process.
Oh
No pun intended,
yeah.
but um, that's really interesting. I mean, I also started in processing, I started in processing, or I like played with it for the very first time probably in 2003, which probably would have been like maybe around when they were putting it out for the first time. But yeah, I had a friend that was like, you should check this thing out. And I checked it out. And um, I think you had also mentioned that you were working a lot with glitch art too, which I think is also like a avenue for many of us into this world. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I was doing a lot of pixel sorting and a lot of I actually got into data moshing, but instead of kind of breaking a video in different ways, I started doing this thing where I like looked into how the data moshing works, and it kind of takes blocks of different parts of the video and tries to like interpolate them. And then when you let it interpolate them forever, you get these cool effects where it kind of like explodes on screen. And I was like, well, I'll try and implement that in processing and then have full control over like how it breaks. And that was a really fun project. But Yeah, I definitely did a lot of glitch art at the beginning, and I feel like I don't know. I don't think this is rude, but I feel like a lot of the glitch art I did was kind of staticky and kind of like very outsider art kind of stuff. So I feel like it would have fit well into the like crypto art scene today in a lot of ways. And so yeah, and with respect to like implementing back propagation and processing, I had no idea what I was doing, and I was using like for loops to do it, and it was outrageous, but it was a lot of fun.
I mean, that's how people learn, right? Is you just like you hack on it for a while and then like you find, oh, there's a new tool that does this way better, right? Like PyTorch or TensorFlow. Yeah, that's really interesting. So I think like everyone, you've sort of like had, I would say, more people have found your work recently through a lot of your clip notebooks and things. But I've followed you, not to be, hipster about it, but I followed you before that. And I was seeing some of your work. I saw some stuff that you were doing around like sort of collages using GANs, and then also like some, I would say like just general GAN generation using, I remember there was like a cool clock thing you were working on for a while. So what were sort of your projects before Clip?
Yeah, it's kind of nice because I feel like a lot of the projects that I did before Clip that I'll talk about kind of set me up to be able to kind of gave me the tools I needed to use Clip effectively, and so I did a lot of just implementing GANs and like trying different loss functions and different architectures. And I mostly did like trees and clocks for some reason. I don't know why, but I think they're both particularly nice things to generate. And I did some feature visualization with BGG16, like just kind of style transfer type stuff, but not exactly style transfer. And yeah, with the collaging, I was thinking about ways to like get around the fact that back propagation is really hard when it's a discrete, like we want this image and we want it in this place and we don't want any kind of like um, fluffiness or fuzziness to it. Like it's discrete, it's categorical even. Um, and so after doing a lot of collaging and a lot of GAN and a lot of collaging, which was discrete, and a lot of feature visualization, which was like learning how to do the right augmentations and that kind of thing to make it so you would get something that wasn't like an adversarial example on the network. That kind of prepped me for going into Clip and being like, oh, you can use these same kinds of techniques of feature visualization and relaxing discrete computations, and so that so yeah. I mean, I guess I just feel like it was as much as the Clip stuff is much more popular. It was kind of a natural progression to that.
I mean, I think that's also for a lot of artists, like you have to start somewhere, right? And like for me personally, like I've sort of like started with a model that someone else built and worked my way backwards. And then I find other people are like, no, I need to start from like ground foundations and build up, right? And I think like those are two like worthwhile like ways to explore it. Um, yeah, so I think, definitely like I was watching your sort of updates or like new things you're putting out, and I was like, I should really be learning the way he's learning. Like I sort of felt like, oh man, I should really be going back to like basics and sort of building stuff from that. But yeah, I think it's definitely like how I see the both groups sort of learning in different directions, and you sort of meet in the middle, or you were like making art no matter what, and hopefully you're inspiring each other in both directions. So yeah, so now you're working a lot with Clip. So tell me about like when Clip came out, or like what did you see in Clip that you were like, oh, I can use this for my own work?
Yeah, so when Clip came out, I was like, well, I'm gonna try and see if I can continue doing feature visualization. And I was like, well, it would be really interesting to try visualizing images that most activate different descriptions. And I remember having this was like a couple of days after Clip came out, and I was kind of like cursing myself because I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. And I added some augmentation where I kind of cut up the image into a whole bunch of little squares and ran it through Clip, and then back propagated through that cropping and that resizing. And suddenly I saw this white clock with a label that said white clock under it. And when I saw the label, I was so freaked out. I was like, this is fantastic. But but yeah, that was kind of how I started. And what I saw in it was just another, like a more free form, open way of going about things than using labels that can only be certain classes, you know.
Yeah, I think that's one of the really exciting things about Clip is it is because it knows so much about language that it's not just like, oh, I have to train it on these class labels and then I have to just get back out those class labels, right? It feels like a way more flexible tool. And I think like what I've seen you and a couple other folks do with Clip is really, really interesting in that it like really leverages the language model that it understands and also some of the weird intricacies of the language model, like it just spits out the label again,
Yeah.
into the visualization. Yeah, it's been really interesting to watch you work. I mean, I feel like I don't know how many notebooks you're up to at this point. I feel like it's like five or six maybe.
Yeah,
Um,
probably too many.
no, I mean, the truth is I think there's never too many, right? And everyone, what I've also loved is for anyone who doesn't know, Ryan also has a Patreon, and he has a Discord. And what I've also been really excited to see is like you'll drop a notebook and then like 2 days later, someone has like taken it in a totally different direction. And that's really cool and really fascinating to me. Um, yeah, so can you decide like when do you decide to break up a notebook or when do you decide to change a notebook's name, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I for a while I was very much set on this idea of like I'm gonna try and only change a name when I'm using like a totally different system or something. And now I've tried to make it so it's like you have big sleep and then you have some improvements I made and I, like increment a number up by one or something. And and so with Aleph I've got like, a ton of different versions and I've tried to make it a little bit more tractable by just like saying Aleph 5.1 or Aleph, 800 eventually. But yeah, and I really love the Discord because like they're doing things and getting outputs that I could not do myself. Like I'll see outputs from people on the Discord or people on Twitter or Reddit, and I'll be like, wow, like I did not think it could make that kind of content. And so it's cool to be able to feel like it's not just something where I like, well, so not only is it like you can think of, a practically infinite number of prompts and run through those, but also like different people are doing totally different things with the notebooks and Clip in general.
Yeah, I think that's been really exciting and just from my own work or from work of like the students that I work with, it's also like really interesting to think about Clip as a way to sort data sets. Like it just feels like it's sort of a Swiss Army knife of tools and like if you attach it to an image generator, you can get images out. If you attach it to some sort of sorting mechanism, you can start to sort by these categories. And it's, you know, for all of the scariness of these big, huge models, there's also a lot of creative uses, and that's sort of why I love the machine learning art community. Is it's someone will always weaponize this thing to like become a Reddit troll,
Yeah.
like GPT style.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of good uses for these things, and I think maybe it's overly optimistic, but the more good uses you can show for these things, the more people might direct their energy toward that and away from the shitty the shitty things that people can do with these tools. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that yeah, I don't know if you saw it, but speaking of like the shitty things, I ended up a while ago figuring out how to do the gradient descent onto the text instead of the image as kind of like a captioning tool. And I thought it was so much fun. And I thought it was because it kind of like at first I was like, oh, Clip is kind of roasting me when I put my images into it, which was super fun. But then I realized that it is horrifically biased and prejudiced. And it's exactly the Reddit troll that you're talking about when you give it the text, the control over the text. And it's just unfortunate because it's a hard problem to find, web scale data that isn't going to have not. I mean, it's kind of intrinsic to data itself to have these biases, from the world in them. But especially unfortunate when it's like just 4chan chatter coming out of it.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that the upside of that is hopefully it's a mirror like proposed back to people and you can start to consider like how are we operating as a society? But the downside is some of it also just is like, well, cool, we can just lay into this and like, you know, force multiply that.
Yeah.
Um, I'm interested just to veer subjects a little bit. I'm interested to hear like what made you decide to go into a PhD program? How does this work connect with your neuroscience work? Like maybe someone out there is also interested in a PhD program, and I'm interested to sort of hear why you ended up where you did.
Yeah. So I got my bachelor's in psychology, and I think it does prepare you to do a lot of things, but it also will never, well, with what I wanted to do, it would never work to get me a job. Like I applied to some not very selective occupations and jobs, and they got back to me in like 5 months. And I was like, well, I guess I'll lean into the research. Not and that's kind of the financial cynical aspect. But I also think that getting to pursue questions that you're interested in and having the chance to share that as well is just super fun, super enriching, and something I definitely figured out that I wanted to do even outside of financial concerns after I did some research with this material science lab. But um, yeah, in terms of my work as a PhD student, I'm a first year, so I am just wrapping up 2 semesters, and I've been kind of split between labs, so it's like I'm doing some disparate things, but I do see a lot of my work moving towards understanding the consequences of using AI in terms of things like visual search and other things. I I think that it's very interesting to not just like human computer interaction stuff because that's very cool, but not exactly what I'm doing. It's kind of like if we augment people with AI, are we actually accomplishing anything, or are we narrowing what they're looking at? Because there are these things called like computer aided um, detection systems that are often used in radiology and things like that. And there's always this question of when we use these, do people over rely on them or under rely on them? And I think there are a lot of interesting questions to ask about how we interface with, um, and I call it AI. I should call it machine learning, but machine learning systems.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested here. So, like, your Patreon's doing pretty well, and I would definitely encourage anyone that is interested in your work to sign up for your Patreon.
Thanks.
If you were making, I don't know, let's say if you're making $4,000 a month through Patreon, which I think is everyone's dream, but if you were to
Yeah.
like, if you were making money on this, would you continue in the world of sort of the lab research work? Would you be an artist full time? What would you be doing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think I'll have to cross that bridge, but if I did, it'd be a hard choice because I think that I really could work all day, every day doing art and making tools for making art because there are just so many directions that you can go with so many different models and this explosion of you know um, creative tools. But I am also like I worry that someday like I'll be like, well, I had a chance to at least get a master's or a PhD, and I'll be like, well, I didn't do that, and I'll regret it. But I think that while I can balance it to some degree, I'll probably continue. And especially while I can balance it to some degree, and while I couldn't really like couldn't quite live off of it, So that's a really good question because it's one I've been thinking about quite a bit. But yeah.
I think it's one, obviously especially within machine learning art, there are not a lot of opportunities to turn it into a full-time career.
Mhm.
It's certainly something that I'm asked so often about, and it's like, I don't know. I make, in my art practice, I make 75% of my money through teaching other people the thing, and they're like, "Hey, can I turn this into a career?" And I'm like, good luck. Like,
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed the class." And I also just did the math in my head, and $4,000 a month through Patreon would not nearly be enough to survive off of. So it would need to be a lot more than that. Um, yeah, but I think all of us are sort of like, we love this stuff. We would love to work on it more. And it's just like, how do you turn that into a business? And truthfully, I think some people have found like, oh, crypto art is my one moment where maybe I can do that, and maybe I should, um, with its own challenges and unique potential issues. Um, I think you've started selling a little bit through, I can never pronounce it. It's HEN. I don't
Yeah,
even know how to pronounce it. Yeah.
I don't know the pronunciation either, but yeah, I sold a little bit on the Tezos. Yeah, it's like Hick at Nung, but not
Yeah.
pronounced that way. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and because I was really adverse to the idea of crypto art when I knew it was, proof of work and definitely ruining the environment. I still have reservations about the whole thing, and I think that ideally it would operate. I think Simon Colton um, said this. He basically said ideally it would operate like a Patreon, where you're just like, well, you can invest in someone's work and maybe get some, get a return on that investment. If you were to like look at the like that band, The National, 10 years ago and be like, oh, they're gonna be big, and I'm gonna give them some money, and then you can turn around and get some return on that. But I do have concerns about like, well, am I enabling tax evasion? Am I enabling like money laundering? And it's one of those almost problems of the commons where it's like, well, if I don't do it and everyone else does, like what difference? But it's definitely it's a hard thing to navigate, but I haven't, made any massive money off of it, so I'm not invested very much either way, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a challenge, and I think like it'll continue to be a challenge for artists. And having gone through a couple tech bubbles now, it's like there's always bubbles where there's moments to make money, and you're like, okay, is this my golden parachute time or not? And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It's a big challenge, but I'm interested, like it sounds like, you've got sort of an interesting dueling path of like the PhD program could lead one alley, the artwork could lead down to another if there's a way to make a career out of it, and then
Mhm.
but like they're kind of like they intermingle at some points, right? There's a little bit of a overlap in places, and that I think is also like what many other people have sort of found works is like, there's the work that pays the bills and there's the work that's fun, and hopefully the two are balanced out in a way that you don't feel like you're killing yourself trying to do both. Yeah.
Totally, yeah. um and I think that it's nice because with Patreon I feel like I can always slow it down a little bit. All of my patrons are super cool about it. I'll be like, you know this week I am going to be buried under PhD work, and then the next week maybe I'll have some time to work on it. But yeah, I think that it's kind of fun to be able to like have your work influenced by your other work, because like I've been doing some stuff with this thing called surprisal theory, where it's like predicting reading times based on these natural language models like GPT-2, and that can be really fun to draw influence from kind of both worlds. But yeah, I mean, ideally I would, well, I don't know. Ideally I would get to choose one and easily live off of it, but obviously we don't live in that world.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm really into like the history of modern art in certain ways, and even back in the 50s and 60s, the only way a lot of those folks were making money was the CIA. CIA was paying them money. So,
The
you know,
CIA.
yeah,
Wow.
there's a whole like theory of the CIA feeding money into modern art as a way to, spread Western influence, right? And,
Oh, okay.
certainly a lot of European countries, that's their idea of how they pay artists is like, well, you're spreading Dutch culture or whatever it is, right? And um, yeah, so there's never been a good path for artists, essentially. It's always been a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
It'll continue to be a double-edged sword. Um, so I promised I would let you get out of here at 7. So why don't we, if you want to walk us through a notebook,
Yeah.
I did a quick demo of Big Sleep like a month ago, and it's quite honestly like my number one watched video. So thank you. Um,
Thank you.
sort of feel like I have to pay it forward a little bit. But people always have lots of questions about, okay, can it do this? Can it do this? Or like, what if I want to produce a video from these things? So I just thought it'd be cool if you sort of walk us through one of your notebooks, and then maybe also talk about a little bit what's going on underneath the hood, and maybe like, you know, Maybe there's some secret things underneath the hood that you think are cool and people can play with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I was thinking that I'd go over the Aleph2Image one, and I can talk. Yeah, I can talk about what's going on with it, and I can talk about ways that people have like extended it to do video and things like that. So yeah, should
Cool.
I
Yeah.
share screen?
Yeah, please.
Cool. Got to figure out. Let's see if I can do this. Oh, perfect. Now everyone knows I have 50 tabs open and 5 windows, but that's fine. So yeah, so with Aleph2Image, first off, to start with like how it's actually made, it uses Cliff, which was made by OpenAI, and it uses DALL-E, but it doesn't. So to talk a little bit about DALL-E, there's the transformer, which is a model that's kind of the brain in DALL-E, and then there's what's called the VQVAE, which is kind of like the canvas or the hands, you could almost think of it as. And they've only released the latter. They haven't released the brains behind DALL-E. They've only released like this network that you can make images out of or make images with, but it kind of is missing the brain, which is the transformer. And yeah, so this one is mostly just influenced by the feature visualization literature and OpenAI stuff. So of course, it's related to DeepDaze, and that it's kind of taking gradient descent and figuring out like what these models are looking for. But anyways, so the first thing that you do with Aleph2Image, and I can, I think this is actually an updated version, so it's kind of like a treat in a way, but I'll share the link if I haven't already. I think it's on Twitter, but it's hard to find these things sometimes.
Yeah,
But so you
we love treats. Thank you.
totally, yeah, and I'll when this is posted, or I can send you the link and maybe you can put it in the description or something.
Yeah, totally. Yep, for sure.
Cool. So you choose your text. I chose "The Moon is Falling" just because it's kind of a zany imagery to think about. So you run the cell. So all of these things are called cells. This is Google Colab, by the way. So there's a lot of technical details that I'll try not to get lost in, but you have this play button next to your code cell, and you can just run it, and that'll set the variable text input to "The Moon is Falling." You've got to. Oh, sorry.
So
Yeah.
real quick, no, yeah. So we definitely have. I have many videos on collab, so you can sort of like skip the collab part,
Oh,
or just
good,
like
good.
skip the collab basics, and people
Sweet.
can go watch that. And hopefully they already have. But if not,
Perfect.
if you're following now, I have a bunch of videos on collab, and I recommend checking those out before coming here. Yeah.
So yeah, so you run all the cells. This particular one labeled as this one is going to, I've already run it, but the first time you run it, it's going to download some things and update PyTorch so that Clip will actually work and won't just give you like 0.43 as the rating for every single image you put into it. And then you'll want to restart and run all. So now that you've set the text, it'll know what you want it to generate. Now that you've run this, that's a technical thing, and then you can just restart and run all. It'll go through and it'll run all of these cells. It'll import all of these different tools that I use. Some of them I don't even use in this notebook. I just kind of have a bunch of tools that I usually use. This will tell you what kind of GPU you got. I got a V100, so that is very lucky and fortunate. This will download Clip. There are a couple of different Clip models, but the Vision Transformer that is used in this notebook is the best in terms of looking at things outside of texture and looking at things like the structure of the image and the shapes of the image. These are some parameters. I would not mess with them for this one, but you could hypothetically make the image smaller or bigger. These are some helper functions. A lot of them aren't used. I leave like not just Easter eggs, but I also leave like old dead code that I never use anymore in a lot of my notebooks.
It might be an Easter egg. It might be a rotten egg. It's sort of, or I
Yeah,
guess like an alien egg. There might be a face hugger in there or something.
totally, exactly. So this will download the DALL-E encoder and decoder. These are the VQVAE, which is a system that can basically take in a whole bunch of numbers and spit out an image, or it can take in an image and spit out a bunch of numbers and then use those numbers to spit out an image. I'll mostly be using the decoder, but I think in this latest version, I do encode like a random noise image to use as a starting place for the actual parameters that are learned. So basically what I'm doing is I'm saying clip will have a text and it will rate how well the text matches this this image produced by the decoder. And then we learn a little bit, a bunch of numbers at the right before we feed them into the decoder. So it's like clip will guide the decoder to images that match a certain prompt, which is the moon is falling.
And so it starts with noise, right? So whereas Big GAN or Big Sleep started with a Big GAN sort of like average image or something, this one starts with noise. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. This one, I used to start it as kind of just like a brown, like dirt looking patch of an image, but now it's set to start as noise because that's a little bit more conducive to like creating an image. It's harder for a neural network to learn when it's getting the exact same when it has the exact same weights kind of in the part of what it's learning, because then you get the exact same gradients, which aren't as useful and all of that. So you'll start out with, I guess, this black image. It's noisy, but you can't really see it because of the scaling. And then hopefully something good. Oh yeah, that's not bad. And then hopefully you'll get something good at the training output. Yeah, with BigSleep, it searches through the GAN to find like good images. With this one, it's kind of building up the image all by itself without having this kind of so with Big GAN, you have this diverse array of images and you're looking for good ones in the latent space. With this one, it's a little bit more like you start with kind of a blank slate, and then it's like, well, how can this image get closer and closer to the prompt that was given?
So it's like, I mean, it's sort of like Deep Dream in a way, right? Where it's like taking the image that already exists and trying to optimize certain patches that it can find like optimizations available to it from. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's the reason that I named BigSleep was because I like that movie, and it's kind of like a hazy, strange movie, which reminded me of a lot of the images, and also because I wanted to riff on Deep Dream a little bit because it was a huge influence and kind of a a seminal work in this kind of area. But yeah, so this will train for a while. It kind of at least for this prompt, it kind of bottoms out and reaches its optimum at like a couple minutes of training. I'll be honest, the Patreon version, the newer version of the notebooks get like a lot better as time goes on. The public versions kind of just stop learning after like a minute of training most of the time.
So yet another reason to join the Patreon.
Yeah, I honestly, a lot of people don't like closed source stuff, and it's like neither do I, but I'm slowly releasing the older stuff and improvements to the public who don't want to join the Patreon. And it's just like, I mean, artists gotta eat, I if I worked at Google, then like yeah, I would open source every piece of code I ever wrote. But I think that open source, this might be a hot take, but I think that open source is a lot less good when you're having random people do extra time, and they're not with an organization that is extremely wealthy, and it starts to feel a little bit exploitative when it's like, well, I've spent hours and hours on this project, but I am expected to not get paid for it when I'm also not getting paid for it, through any other means.
Totally, yeah, no, but one of the more common questions that I usually get out of this, and I've never really been sure, is like, how long do you train this for? So I think that's helpful to hear that like probably the ones you're finding publicly through Twitter or whatever are good after a couple minutes, and other ones take a little bit longer. So I think that that's one, like that's cool because some people just want to be able to create an image really quickly, and other people really want to dig in deep. And I think like there again, well, How much time do you want to spend? What do you want to pay for it? Those sort of things. Like it's just like life. So I appreciate that. And that's really cool. And I think that's helpful for me to know too, because I think I've always opened your public ones and just been like, cool. But I am a Patreon member, and I should probably dig in a little bit deeper and like look at some of the other stuff. So yeah, that's good to hear.
Yeah, and let's see, what was it? Yeah, there are probably stopping criteria that you could make, but I've always thought that, like, why would I not let it keep going? Oh, and I guess I haven't talked about this, but there is a ding that comes on every time to remind you that
Everyone
it
asks about the
exists.
ding.
Yeah, yeah. I was so close to removing it, and then I like did a poll on Twitter, and people were like, "Oh, we like the ding," and I was like, "Well, I guess I won't remove it."
I think Twitter optimizes for people with a certain ADHD like quality. So, and
Yeah,
even in my classes, like people have been like, I always forget I have a notebook running, so what should I do? And I've stolen your code and just been like, drop this into a cell and like you'll get a ding when it's done. So,
yeah.
yeah, I think, I think the ding is helpful, and as long as people know about it beforehand and can turn it off, or like, learning to mute Chrome tabs is important for YouTube and other things as well. So, learning to just mute your tab if it's not for you. I think that is probably the best way to go about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I have like this Pavlovian response to it where like I hear the ding and I'm like so excited to see what's going on with it. But yeah.
All right, so that's the line. If people want to comment it out, you have to comment it. One thing that I think some people have missed before is you have to comment it out before you run the cell. So if you run the cell and then comment it out, you're still going to get the ding because the cell's already running. So just
Yeah.
a note for people, you have to turn it off before you run the cell.
And then you can also just right click the tab and
Yeah,
it's muted right now, but yeah.
cool. Okay, so you told me a little bit about why you called Big Sleep Big Sleep. Why did you call this one Aleph to image?
I actually kind of love this quote from so Borge. I'm probably ruining the pronunciation of that name, but Borge wrote this really fantastic short story about this guy who, and this isn't spoilers because the Aleph is kind of, even though it's named the Aleph is kind of a side plot in a way, almost, I would argue. Kind of a, maybe a hot take. But anyways, this guy finds this thing called the Aleph, and he's able to see all of the world all at once. And after he does that, he's like, "Oh, I'm worried that I'm gonna be bored of everything outside of the Aleph because it's like I've already seen the whole world all at once." And I was just thinking about that because I felt like while you're able to generate almost anything, any prompt you could think of, it's like at first I was worried that I was going to get bored with it, but then I realized like all of my previous work was something that I had kind of gotten bored with, but it was like the first time interacting with Clip, I was like, this is like the internet but exciting again almost. So I was kind of riffing on this idea of like excitement and surprise and kind of um, the idea of computers surprising you. And this was just a thing where I was like, well, I was so bored of computers, but now I feel like they're kind of surprising again, which was just reminded me of the short story. And I also just think that as a word, Aleph is a pretty cool one.
Yeah, I mean, what I also really find interesting or fascinating about this stuff is like the slight tweaks in language have a big change in the output.
Mhm.
Um, which is kind of one of the fun things about machine learning in general is like minor tweaks make big differences.
Mhm.
And it's sort of like this game you're playing with the machine where like I think a lot of other generative art is I'll control this by tweaking, this variable or whatever. Whereas machine learning, like you tweak a variable and you still don't know what you're going to get out of it. So it's sort of like there's a conversation back and forth of like, okay, if I tweak you a little bit this way, what do I get? Oh, okay, you want to go more this way. Okay, let's try that. And I think that that's a fun, it's sort of like a, again, like it's not like, the machine knows what it's doing. It's just like
Mhm.
there's a conversation or like a play at place there. And yeah, I've been really interested to watch you and a bunch of other folks like know like sort of like, oh, these words work well, these words don't work as well, like those sort of things. And there's like some fun learning there.
Yeah, one of the most like kind of funny stories that kind of happened early on with BigSleep was I asked for a horse with four eyes because Janelle Shane had shown that GPT-2 has no idea that a horse has two eyes and not four eyes. Like it doesn't care because it's never seen a horse. So I was like, maybe this will improve this multimodality of seeing images and text will make it so it can understand a horse and know that it has two eyes. So I was like, okay, I'll try a horse with four eyes. And it gave me a horse wearing glasses. And I was like, oh, that is so charming and sweet. Um, and and it's yeah, it's just one of those things where like you really don't know what you're gonna get, and it feels like you're kind of reflecting over things sometimes when you do prompts with it.
Yeah, and as two guys with both wearing glasses, I think like we've all experienced four eyes as a mean way to make fun of us, and I don't know, maybe doing it for horses, it's I don't know if you can hurt a horse's feelings with that, or
Yeah.
if the machine knows that's even mean.
Yeah.
R Ryan, this has been awesome. I've really enjoyed talking, and I definitely hope in the future I can get OBS to not suck, and we can actually have like a cool live chat with more of your Patreons and my Patreons and my YouTube members. Um, so again, I highly recommend joining Ryan's Patreon. I'll add a link to it. If you're not already following him on Twitter, I definitely recommend that. Are there anywhere else people should check you out or follow you?
I mostly just operate on Twitter, yeah, as I don't even know how to pronounce it. Add bad noun. It started off as like a weird nickname, but anyways, yeah, I mostly operate on Twitter. So if anyone's interested in following, that would be the
As
best
someone
place.
who also has a impronounceable Twitter handle, I can appreciate that. Well, hey, thank you so much for spending time with me, and hopefully in the future it'll be us, the whole channel. But yeah, I really appreciate you walking through this, and I can't wait to play with some of these notebooks and also see where you end up next. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a great time.